Well, I get a kick out of giving the next award because I got it once. It's the Alfred Lindesmith Award for Scholarship. We have a rule, by the way, that anybody can nominate somebody for award, and the DPA staff play a key role in selecting, but DPA staff and board members cannot be selected. So there are some incredibly worthy people on our board staff, but there are some who got it before they joined the board or afterward. In this case, I'm going to, well, actually, there's one other thing I wanted to say before one of the recipients of this award passed away a few months ago. And I just want to say, you know, a lot of us here knew and respected and loved and missed Mike Gray. You know, I mean, I remember when that award was given, and there was this debate, should it be the Brecker Award or the Lindesmith Award? Because in a way, he was almost more in the tradition of Ed Brecker. He was a journalist, a writer, who wrote this sort of breakthrough book. I mean, drug crazy. In its own way, it may not have done what Michelle Alexander's, you know, New Jim Crow or the Eugene Jarecki film did, but his book, The New Jim Crow, that came out 10, 15 years ago, was an eye-opener for an incredible number of people. And just like Michelle and the others, he didn't say, there's my book, I'm going on the next thing. He went back and committed much of the rest of his life to this cause, working with Common Sense for Drug Policy, doing incredible work, continuing to write, interview, be creative, always believing that we were just that close to the tipping point. So I just want to say, for me and a lot of others, we miss you, Mike. You really made a fantastic contribution. I'm glad we had a chance to recognize you when you were around. So, this award is going to be given by my colleague and partner, Marcia Rosenbaum, to the remarkable Paul Armentano at Armentano. Yeah.
It is such a pleasure to be able to present this award to Paul Armentano, who is Deputy Director at another organization I love, which is Normal.
Yeah!
Paul regularly speaks to surprising groups of academics, and he speaks to other scholarly groups who don't know much about marijuana. But by the time Paul Armentano is finished with them, they know about marijuana. He's also the author of 750 publications, including he's co-author of the most recent one, I think, or at least 2008, Marijuana is Safer. But all of these points on his resume don't really capture the scholarship and the generosity of Paul Armentano. Paul is a virtual encyclopedia about marijuana. And whenever I or some of my colleagues, one mentioned to me earlier, another Lindesmith Award winner, Craig Reinerman, says, so when we have a question about marijuana, this is what we say to each other: call Paul. So it is my great pleasure to present the Lindesmith Award appropriately to Paul Armentano.
Thank you, Marcia. You know, I never realized the lights were so bright when you're standing up here. I'm flattered. I was flattered just to be nominated for this award, much less to receive it. When one looks at the past recipients of this award, it's really easy to be humbled when you see names like the late Lynn Zimmer, who co-wrote just one of the most fantastic books on this issue, Marijuana Myths, Marijuana Facts. Lester Greenspoon has won this award. Thomas Zaz won this award early on, and that was actually a very important person to me. He wrote a book in 1992, it was published, called Our Right to Drugs. And my father, who had shaped a lot of my views, he taught me a very important lesson when I was very young. He taught me to question, and specifically he taught me to question those institutions that were often taught as a society not to question, like the state, like law enforcement. And Thomas Zaz wrote this book called Our Right to Drugs when I was 20 years old, and my father gave me that book. He said, you ought to read this. You ought to think about it. And I did. I've been thinking about it ever since. So I'd like to thank Ethan, Marcia, the staff at DPA for this award. I'd like to thank my boss, so many of these years, Alan St. Pierre, for, in many ways, giving me the autonomy and the freedom to branch out and take on many of the projects and do many of the things that I've done. And in many ways gave me the confidence and said, here, go ahead. Even though this is uncharted territory, maybe for us, maybe for drug law reformers, go ahead, you can do it. I appreciated that, I respected that. And I got into this issue with a single motivating factor. It was about social justice. That was almost 20 years ago. It was at a time when it was almost inconceivable to even think we'd be where we are now. And things like talking about marijuana industries, marijuana creating jobs, tax revenue, they weren't even something that we would consider at that time. They weren't anything I considered at that time. They weren't a motivating factor. And frankly, while it's great we've made the strides we've made so we can have those conversations, things like jobs and tax revenue or potential tax revenue or reprioritizing police resources, they're not my motivation now either. My motivation when I got into this was I was sick and tired of seeing good people's lives ruined because of their use or possession or cultivation of a benevolent plant. And that's still my motivation. And we can't lose focus of the fact that that should be our overriding motivation. And I'll end with this. When I think about the work I've done and why I continue to do the work I do, I'm going to quote a line from Carl Hart's excellent book, where he says, "Those who know cannot not know." And I think I speak for myself and everybody in this room when I say we know, and therefore we have an obligation, because we know, to educate those who don't know. Thank you.
Did I say before that Mike Gray wrote the New Jim Crow? Yeah, well, you know who wrote the New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander. Another part of my job up here is I'm supposed to tell you who these awards are named after. Like I say Andrew Weil, most of you know him, right, as the granddaddy of integrative medicine in America today. But the reason the award's named after him was because of those remarkable books he wrote, The Natural Mind, Chocolate to Morphine, The Marriage of the Sun and the Moon, the many articles, the breakthrough research and thinking. That's why we named the Drug Education Award after him. And the Lindesmith Award, Alfred Lindesmith, he was the first prominent academic in America to challenge conventional thinking about drugs and drug policy. He taught at Indiana University for decades, was a prominent sociologist. He was persecuted by the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, but he wrote classic books and articles, defied the establishment with his academic scholarship. When I first created the center, Lindesmith Center, I said, that's who this thing has to be named after because of the quality of his work. Now, the next award is named after Robert Randall. We sometimes think of medical marijuana as beginning in the 1990s with California, the ballot initiative. But in fact, it really began, in some respects politically, with Bob Randall. He was the guy who went to court, sued the federal government, said, I need marijuana as my medicine, and won the right for the federal government to supply him with his medical marijuana. Right? That the University City Farm, the government run, to supply it. So he fought that out, he helped build this movement, he died prematurely, but the award for citizen activism and citizen action, which is far and away the most competitive award we give out because there's such a remarkable number of talented people, and we typically give it to more than one person. And this year it's going to be to two people. The two are Steph Sherer, the head of Americans for Safe Access, and Lorenzo Jones from The Better Way. So I'm going to ask first my colleague Amanda Lyman, one of the leading experts about marijuana in America, to present this award to Steph.
Good evening, everyone. There we go. So I am absolutely honored and actually very humbled to present this award tonight to the Executive Director of Americans for Safe Access, Steph Sherer. So even though Steph is probably most known for her work with medical cannabis, her fingerprints can be seen all over drug policy reform. And whether that's training new activists and teaching them how to have a voice in this movement, or working with organizations like Law Enforcement Against Prohibition to help shape their mission and help them achieve what they want to achieve, she has done so much for so many. But her biggest imprint has been in the lives of the millions, and I'm not underestimating when I say millions of people, of patients who needed someone to advocate on their behalf. And she took that charge over 10 years ago and has not stopped. No matter who legalizes or what happens with the industry, she has one goal, and that is to provide access to safe medicine for patients who need it. So I'm going to bring Steph up here, but one last thing I want to say, not to be crass, but in a movement full of men, she has the biggest balls of anyone I've ever met.
I'm really honored and a little speechless, which I know you guys aren't used to. This means a lot to me. I came from the global justice movement, and I started Americans for Safe Access as a patient. I didn't envision my life here. I had a neck injury and found out that my kidneys can't process ibuprofen, and medical cannabis saved my life and means that I get to live a pretty normal life, except for now I'm really busy with the fact that my medicine is illegal. And as Executive Director of Americans for Safe Access, I still live as a criminal. I live in Washington, D.C., and my condition doesn't qualify. And you know, it's a huge responsibility to represent such a huge portion of the U.S. population who don't have voices, that have to live with stigma and discrimination, and don't have the privilege to stand up and say, I need this medicine. I luckily don't have children, or a house, or things that I would lose that would prevent millions from being able to speak the way that I get to speak. But being a part of the drug policy movement has been very amazing. I just want to say, when I first started working in this movement, you know, there weren't a lot of women around in positions, in organizations, and I just really want to applaud Drug Policy Alliance that has so many women on their staff. And I think we can all see the effect of having so many women on our staff, right? When this became my medicine, I wasn't a policy expert about drug policy reform. And I had to make these phone calls to Ethan and others and say, so this should just be legal, right? Like, there's medical evidence. What's wrong? I think my plan was to do this in 2 years, right? 11 years later. But I've had the honor to work with just amazing people, and I'm so moved by a movement that is willing to meet the consumers and the users where they are, that are willing to take a snapshot of this country and realize that these are true human rights violations that are happening every day, and really because of, at this point, corporate interests and racism. And the work that you all do, it's just phenomenal. I love this conference. I walk away so inspired and humbled by the conversations we have in the halls and all of the panels. And I just want to say that there are so many amazing people in this room that helped me get here. Whitney Taylor has been an amazing advisor of mine. Nikki Morris, Mary Lynn Mather, was like one of the only women in medical cannabis for the longest time. And I just want to say that at the end of the day, we're all fighting for a day where we don't have to be embarrassed by what makes us well, what makes us happy, and what makes us free. So thank you so much.